Thank you. Yeah, well, thanks, Nick. I don't know if I should introduce myself or what. I could do like a 30-second version. Computer geek, recovering, got into peak oil. Who's aware of that, incidentally? Okay. For those that don't, just energy depletion issues. Looking at big picture stuff. I thought this permaculture thing might have been something to do with a kind of hippie form of organic gardening. Maybe where there was, I don't know, you did it by the moon or something. I had no idea. I cold called David Holmgren, who's one of the co-originators, because I knew he was interested in these energy depletion issues, and I found somebody on the other end of the phone who was vastly my intellectual superior. It was quite humbling. Not quite what I expected. And from that point on, that was maybe 2004. I've got increasingly involved, and part of that history is through Permablitz. So I'll save that bit till next. So these are a few of the things that I would like to cover, and it actually depends a little bit where you're at and what you're interested in learning. I'm not going to be able to tailor an individual presentation, obviously, but like out of interest, who's studied permaculture or is studying at the moment? You can, yeah. Okay, so that's quite a lot. And so, well, for those that haven't, and perhaps for those that have, one thing I was thinking would be to go through a few urban design strategies, particularly focusing on the backyard scale. And of course, I'll do a little history of Permablitz just to let you know where it got to where it was today, and go through a few examples. That's non-negotiable. And I mean, how many people are interested in just coming along to blitzes, and how many would potentially be interested in helping facilitate or design or organize a network? So if you hand up if you're in the latter camp. Yeah. All right. Well, and it was billed more or less to talk about it from that perspective. So we'll go through a few of the things that we've learnt from running that many blitzes, and some tips for it. And then actually the little network, the hub, the collective that helps the Permablitzes happen in Melbourne is like far and away the best group of people I've ever worked with. And I used to have a complete meeting phobia. Horrified by the thought of in a room talking seriously with people about serious things and agendas, and yet I find it a pleasure. So part of that's the systems we've developed, so I'll very quickly mention those, I think. Yeah, so this is, can we turn these lights off possibly? So back in 2005, I did a permaculture course with Dan Palmer, the man on the right, who's now a good friend and my business partner. And he was likewise, he was a philosopher and a academic psychology with a teaching job in New York. He's a very desk-bound kind of guy, but he was quite successful. Like, he had 2 book deals, he was a teaching job in New York. When we did the permaculture course together in 2005, he said he learnt more of local and global relevance in those 2 weeks than he did in 30 years of formal schooling. And more or less vowed never to wear a suit again. And that's him doing an expression I like to call the can-do Dan. He doesn't like me to call it that. Anyway, so he had this like beautiful backyard. After he did his permaculture course, he was living with some other permies, and it was on a Channel 31 show called Vasily. Do you get that up here? Must be a Melbourne thing. Anyway, it was fantastic. It was even celebrated by the Greek community, basically. And one night he was out jogging in an outer suburb of Melbourne. He spent a bit of time in South America, and he likes the street life you get in some of the big capitals there. And by contrast, all you see in the in this particular, in the suburbs of Melbourne is dark streets and a TV flickering behind curtains. Nothing much happening. He was a little bit depressed by that as he was jogging around. But it just so happened that there was a light and happy voices coming out of a little community centre, not unlike this one, although more humble. And he popped his head in and smiled, and it was some South American guys playing some cards, and they said, "Come in, have a beer." And this is the little group on the left. They were called CADEMO, the group for a community for multicultural development organisation or something. And they're mostly just South Americans. They just got together. They're a bit isolated in that part of the world, just to fight suburban isolation, basically. They didn't really. A lot of them don't speak English that well, but they had embraced the pavlova, and heart disease and obesity and you know, even cancer was a problem with a lot of them. And at the same time, they were, you know, quite interested in Dan's backyard. So, there it is, Dan's backyard. And so this is Vilma from El Salvador, and Dan invited myself and some of his permaculture friends and other mates to come along with the South Americans. And over the course of the day, we transformed this, bringing in some mulch and compost that was donated. The now traditional naming circle. Now here's doing a bit of design on a whiteboard. Now we quickly learnt you don't do that on the day with lots of opinionated South Americans. This woman here, she was a really devout Catholic, and one of the possible designs for that pathway was a cross, and she wouldn't budge on it. So it didn't. Anyway, it worked out differently. But now before every blitz, the design goes into it. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. There's Willie from Chile, Melbourne's Chilean dance champion at the age of 76. These guys were so into planting avocado, they dug 2 holes. Everyone just went off and did their own thing. So we also have facilitators, you know, these days, growing some plants. Now putting in a little bit of a permaculture cliche, a half-tire pond, cheap way to make a little pond. Doing a bit of no-dig gardening here. For those who haven't come across it before, we're just layering up rich green, high nitrogen materials with high carbon materials and sheet mulch out of newspaper. So that newspapers are going to suppress weeds and slowly break down and just feed the soil anyway. Some compost on top, and yeah, we made a nice little garden. I think I turned up actually quite late in the afternoon, just in time to plant one. I don't know if I did anything, but I had a beer and a barbecue. And Dan very generously lets me say I'm a co-founder. And and these blitzes always ended in a salsa dance, which we came to call the perma salsa. Yeah. And there it is 6 months later. And so it really built from there. 2 weeks, it was so much fun, like there was no question of not doing it again, basically. So 2 weeks later, we booked in another one through the South American community. And by that stage, they were really taking the lead. After, well, a few in, you know. They learned all the sort of strategies and, and it was really working well. So people were starting to ask for them elsewhere. So here's just a few more pictures of some other ones. I might actually go, this property I'm going to go through as a design example. We've done overnight ones out in the country. I was putting in quite a large orchard and some serious potato production. Dan's place, well, it was actually a rental, and when the real estate agent came for the inspection, she only got 1 foot out the door and didn't land it, apparently, and just saw, they had asked permission for a few veggie beds, but it was wall to wall. So that was a long period of negotiation, but this is actually reverse Permablitz, where we distributed all that biological material out into the other people's yards, which was a nice way of, and actually his housemates got all this free offers for living for free in people's houses and developing the gardens. And that was Nelson, who was really one of the founders of Permablitz, the head of CODEMO, who's a great community organiser. And the permasol, so I'll go through, this was a nice one in Hilly Eltham in Melbourne. It was a couple of people that had very little gardening experience actually, and I wouldn't have thrown them quite so far in the deep end as the designers did of this one. And they were both into design and IT, and not, you know, the most, they weren't used to physical work, so I'm surprised how well this one went. But we put in quite a large pond. We're working with the contours of the land. So those beds are actually absolutely flat and they run parallel down the hill. And that stops water and mulch run off when it rains. Again, there's the classic sheet mulch. We're keeping stuff quite close to the back door here, and around the clothesline's a good spot because you go there anyway. So that's a good spot to grow veggies and things. And there it is 6 months later, looking beautiful. Obviously these guys did a little bit of work as well, you know, it's keeping them busy. But yeah, beautiful garden. Here's one I'll run through quickly. This is probably my favourite Permablitz ever. It was a few years ago. It was at a hospital in a place called Kuirup in the country. And it was a community garden for the school and for the hospital. And it was just really community spirited. Like there was a local cop on the Bobcat. All tradies donated their time to put in the irrigation stuff. Local farmer donated truckloads of organic compost. And yeah, and it was a 2-day overnight one. So we camped out in the hospital grounds, and local people gave speeches about the you know what, the school, why they wanted their students to eat healthier food, and a guide that explained the whole natural history of the area. And it was, you know, it just really brought the community together. And there's that one just a few months later. We've got a lot more pictures on the web. There's one at an assisted living place, and Summit neighbourhood and houses. Now, so at some point along this process, we decided, well, we better give this a definition. And we came up with the word Permablitz fairly early on. And this is how we define it. So a Permablitz is an informal gathering involving a day on which at least 2 people come together to achieve the following. To create or add to edible gardens where someone lives or sometimes works. To share skills related to permaculture and sustainable living. To build community networks. And to have fun. And the last one nearly always just happens, whether you want it to or not. Or the last 2 really. Yeah, so that's pretty much the definition. It's very basic. It's not groundbreaking. It's just I don't know, it's so simple you can explain it to anybody really quickly, and yet it's captured people's imaginations. Maybe because it is so simple. But there are a couple of other qualifiers, one quite soft and one fairly hard, that we have. And the soft one is reciprocity. So there's an Amish barn raising. So, you know, you help somebody else build their barn, well, you get a lot of people helping with yours, and it all happens in a fun way where there's rhythm to the work and conversation, and that's what happens on a Permablitz. It's just much more fun. It's the same amount of work for the same amount of garden, but there is some synergy, you know, of putting heads together too and figuring problems out. Now we say come to 3 or so to have a Permablitz at your house. And we're deliberately a little bit vague about that because we don't want people to just be doing it mathematically, they're putting in their 3 so they can have one. It's not really about that. Everybody that comes to a Permablitz should have a good time, and most people come along not because they want one at their house. And the soft part of it is, well, if they're contributing to the community in other ways, if they're socially isolated, we will make an exception. But having somebody come to a few first proves, 1, that they mean business, 2, that they've got some skills that they've developed through the Permablitz network, and 3, that it keeps the whole thing going. We don't want it to be just a charity putting stuff out there, that it's an informal economy. And of course, they also get ideas for their own place. So the other qualifier about what a Permablitz is the perma part, which stands for permaculture. And each Permablitz must have a permaculture design beforehand. So we say somebody that's done a PDC, which is what Nick and Kirsten are facilitating at the moment, and some people in this room are doing, which is a 2-week, or you can do it in other formats, but it's a roughly 72-hour course where you learn the basics of permaculture design. So we say somebody that's done one of those should have some input into the design. And that's really because we want these things to work. Permaculture design is about creating systems which are going to give you a lot back for what you put in. About, we say it's about working with nature rather than against it, which sounds a bit, high and mighty or, ideological, but it comes down to just some quite clever, often common sense ways of organising things so that you need to put less in terms of your own energy and in terms of inputs to get more out. And I'll go through an example now, actually, if you're happy with that. We do have a Permablitz Designer's Guide, which doesn't really give you the full background on everything you need to know to do a designer to design one. But if you've done a PDC, it's complementary just to know what's expected of you and a few good tips that we've found work just specifically in urban design stuff. Permaculture design has to be tailored to. Sometimes I say, I think of permaculture as about it's designing edible ecosystems so that when you eat, you are somehow giving back to the world, and that's its extreme goal. But then you talk to some people and they go, "Oh yeah, I know about permaculture. It's chickens, right?" Permaculture has to be specific to the person and specific to the location, and there is no permaculture strategy really. There are things that often get clustered under there, but that could change at any time. It's really about some design principles and doing things that are appropriate. So I won't go into too much detail here, but it starts with people analysis. And when I do a design, I will often avoid really even looking outside, except for a glance, just to get a bit of a sense of scale. And I definitely won't ask people what they want where, because you've got to know who you're dealing with first and foremost, and because they could be anybody. What their skills are, their budget are, what their dreams are, what are their motivations, and what is their wish list, and suss them out for just how keen they really are. So that's stage one, and our idea then is to mesh that as neatly as we possibly can with the nuances of the landscape. So this is what we call a sector and microclimate analysis. Veg is my business, which I'll mention very briefly with Dan. So this is one of ours. What we've put here is where the sun is in different seasons, where the really hot spots are. Like it's essentially, this part of the house is Mediterranean, this part of the house is Sydney, and this part's Hobart. You do quite different things in different regions. Where are the winds coming from, and how exposed is that particular house to them? So you've got to look outside the yard. We're looking at slope. We're looking at soil types, and we're looking around and seeing what is growing well here and there. And so it's only when we've done the people analysis and the site analysis that we start to think about design. And here's that one just fleshed out. So what I might do is just take you through one design example which will illustrate a few of the strategies we use. This one, almost predates Permablitz actually. It was around the same time when the Permablitz started when we did the design for it, so it's well down the track. So it's a good one to show as an example, but it is also a little bit unusual because the backyard itself is a 1/4 acre. It's quite an enormous block. They've actually got 13 neighbours. Yeah, but and most of the action's happening in the back. So this is what it looked like beforehand. It was an emergent forest, really. It's in the hilly area of Melbourne, and it was just turning back to what it wants to be. Except it was pittosporum and ivy and weedy species, and they were fine with that, but they really wanted to grow a lot of food. The clients, Kim and Clive, were hitting retirement age. Kids were getting ready to move out of home. They were about to have a lot more time on their hands. And Kim was, yeah, she was interested in the issue of peak oil. Actually, Clive works in the oil industry. Currently our clients who are most hardcore about preparing for peak oil and financial collapse, she works for a major bank and he works for Shell. Yeah. So, yeah, maybe they know something, someone said. Yeah. So this is the backyard. It's a little bit unusual because north is that way. Normally we'll have it up, but now I'll just tell you that the slope is going down here. Now, that's probably about as bad as slope gets. It's probably even worse in Melbourne than here, actually, but it means that you don't get a lot of the morning sun, which is coming up here. You don't get much, winter sun in general, when your block has a bit of a south-facing slope, is a bit more limited. But in summer, you do get the belting late afternoon westerlies. Yeah, westerly sun. So it's about when you don't want the sun, basically. The soil's also really poor. Which most of eastern Melbourne is. Now, one of the first things we do is think about access, pathways. I'll just mention actually one more thing. They wanted to, this is the neighbours. They wanted to make it so the neighbours couldn't see off their deck into their deck. This is their clothesline. This is the kitchen here. Now, I mentioned that we like to put high maintenance things near the back door, and if it's near the kitchen, even better. So where might we put our veggies and salad greens and herbs in this case? Yeah, you could put some on the patio, and in fact, although it's not in the design, this is filled with herbs in pots. One place they go almost daily or every other day is the clothesline. And this is also paved here, so they can actually get out of their kitchen just with their socks on if they want and pick stuff from that bed. So that's where the green stuff is where the herbs and salad greens were to go. And here's a picture of that area after a retaining wall has gone in, and that's right off the deck. And so you can access all your salad greens there. There it is a few months later. 3 years later. We like to work ponds into the design because they bring in beneficial life, birds, frogs, lizards, and beneficial insects, and they just help you with the pest control. We use the angle of the sun very carefully a lot of the time. So in this case, that was designed to reflect morning sun through a large part of the year onto the bedroom ceiling, only they put it in the wrong spot. Yeah, actually that moved altogether because, and that's a cover crop, a green manure to dig in to improve the rubbish soil, and that's where herbs are going to go. Although actually it's sort of turned into mostly strongly smelling stuff, which makes the clothes smell really nice. We've also used the angle of the sun here. Now this was a very dry area, and actually even though it's quite close to the back door, it's very steep, so it may as well have been right up the back. So that's natives, and they've been selected sort of height stacked, we call it, so taller ones are towards the back. And not too tall though, so sun is still going to get through to these veggies in winter, but it's going to just block out there. Now I said that the slope is going down this way. So if I'm drawing a line here, what have I drawn? Contour, yeah. So if you walk along this line, you're neither going up nor down. And that's why it's a little bit curved, because it's curving around the landscape. They're actually fences. But one thing we wanted on this property, because the soil there was a lot of runoff. It was compacted, there was very little topsoil. We wanted to keep that on site. So what we've done here is we've dug some trenches. And those trenches are on contour. So what happens when water hits that trench? Just sits there, yeah. So it cannot go down anymore until that trench is full. So we're just holding that water there until it infiltrates into the soil rather than letting it run off. That system's called a swale, which is used and abused in permaculture quite a lot. So there's the trees. They all actually stayed on site. That's them there. And the swales, yeah. And you actually put all what you dug out in a mound beneath the trench. That's really nice, loose, and double the depth of topsoil now. So that's a good spot for planting trees. And it kind of has the best of both worlds because it's a little bit elevated, so it's not waterlogged, but it's getting water deep to the root system. So that's that orchard area. 3 years later, here's just how the swale works. You get it right. The cross section. He's just holding it there so the water infiltrates. I'll skip this. So the first time they filled, actually, because the soil was so bad, that water stayed there long enough to breed mosquitoes, or get them started. It was over a week. Each subsequent time, though, as that water gets into the soil, and as plants get their roots down, the soil structure opens up, and now the water doesn't stay there for more than a few hours. Each time it was less. Okay, so these are the swales. So what are these purple things? Trees, yes. What kind of trees?
The palm tree.
Yeah. Actually, they're not the fruit trees. They're support species. One thing, when you've got a bit of space, you can do is imitate a forest a little bit. Well, in a very simplified way, that is, in this case. But where pretty much all ecosystems have got nitrogen-fixing species in them. So that's the legume family, yeah? And there's others, but primarily those. So that's things like beans. What else have we got? What was that? Acacias, yeah. Very good. So in the tree form, one of the native form that you'll find in most or in many Australian ecosystems is the acacias. And if they're not there, often there's other little smaller nitrogen-fixing plants. They're called nurse trees because they help build the soil, and they also grow fast and protect the trees next to them from wind. So that's actually a Tagasasti, which is from the Canary Islands. It grows fast, and we do what we call chop and drop. Every springtime, you just chop it back, and it's just going to lay there and mulch around the fruit trees, and the fruit trees get a burst of the nitrogen in the mulch. Actually below the soil as well, the roots let it off at the same time. So they pump. And you kind of leave them there until the canopies touch the fruit tree. You're just improving soil until that point happens. So there's the fruit trees there. And there's an apricot a couple of years in. I guess the only other thing to mention is there's a big water tank up the top. And this fence, these fences actually delineate chicken runs. They've never actually put the internal ones in, but this was an existing shed, and that's turned into the chook shed. And this little area here is called a straw yard. Now that has an amazing ability to turn the power of chook. Now chooks just love to scratch and dig for bugs. That's what gives their life meaning. We can harness that to get them to do our composting for us. And it also makes their conditions more hygienic. There's the orchard. Well, there's the orchard, which is also their run. And have I got a photo in? There's the straw yard. So the way it works is you pile a whole lot of straw up in there, and that's going to absorb their manure. And when you put them to bed at night, because you make this completely fox-proof, you just put them into the straw yard, which is connected to their hutch. And they can come and go as they please. So if you go away for a weekend, they've got somewhere to be. And this straw absorbs their manure smells, but you can also throw your food scraps on it. And they'll pick and eat what they want. And in fishing for the worms and things, which is attracted to this composting matter, so they love it in there, they're turning it. And so your two big problems that most people have with composting is not turning it enough and not enough carbon. And the straw provides the carbon and the chooks do the work. It's a very elegant system. There's Kims with passion fruit growing over it, so you just walk underneath there and pick the passion fruits. There's ducks in the orchard. There was one part of the design there where we left because we didn't know how hardcore they were going to be, as the expansion zone. If they didn't have enough time, they can bring the orchard down. But if they had more time and they wanted to grow more food, they can bring the veggies up, and they did the latter. All right, and the soil is just radically improved. So, well, I could quickly go through a Permablitz one, because that one we've actually implemented through 2 Permablitzes, but obviously a lot more's gone into it as well. But I'll do one more really quickly. So this is a friend's place actually in Brunswick, and it's a rental. And this design took all of probably about 2 hours to figure out. Although in this case I sort of did a little permaculture workshop for the people, and we did it together, so it took a bit longer than it might have, but it's a nice way of doing it. And so it's really simple. This is their kitchen. They walk out here, they want the veggies fairly close, but this is too shady, and they wanted a bit of lawn. So veggies. They want chickens. That's a little chicken house there where you can access the eggs really easy. And it's really on the way to the clothesline and to the chickens that you see, especially if you do a little loop, collect your eggs, get some clothes in the basket, back inside. You've seen your whole veggie patch. And there's the straw yard and the chook run. And so they're a little bit further back, and we actually, and there's potential to put some fruit trees in there if they want to commit. Do you want to watch a quick time lapse of that one? Ooh. It goes for about a minute. Yeah. There's workshops happening. There's a lot of time going into clearing kikuyu. Really helps having people around to do that. You can figure that out. Another workshop. This is the straw yard happening in the background. This is us putting the veggies in and then going, oh, you should always do that after the mulch. So that was done on about I don't know, pretty much everything was scavenged. The only thing that was paid for was some mushroom compost. Even the plants, as it turned out, were donated. Yeah, so the beer is probably the biggest expense. How are we going? Yeah. All right. Well, so that so that was the design part that always happens before the Blitz, and of course the other bit is the planning. So for those that are interested in potentially running one, I'll go through it quite quickly. Part of it is just the logistics. So at this Blitz, we didn't think of just how this ramp was absolutely crucial to movement of materials. And we planned for a lot of things, but not, I mean, we managed to knock that together, but if we hadn't have been able to, it would have fallen on its head. So thinking about movement of materials is really crucial. But there is a point where you can plan too much as well. Like, one of the best things about Permablitzes is that it's organised chaos. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, actually. So it's good to have a couple of facilitators, at least, of any Blitz. So you want to have them prepared before the day as well. Now, there's a few different tiers. So, well, I guess the role of the facilitator is, firstly, is, you know, you're trying to get things done for the host. And sometimes there's a little bit of a tension there between making sure everyone's feels educated as well. So you want to run workshops. And you, as a facilitator, you might be running the workshops. And I guess you're also just making sure people don't get hurt. So they're your four main goals. And we try and break it up a bit so you're not necessarily focused on all of them. And the other one is just that people are busy and being utilised, because the worst thing is just when there's too many people, or you're not organised enough to utilise them, and this bottleneck gets you. And we routinely, I mean, in Melbourne, we have to RSVP and cap it, because they will book out a couple of weeks in advance. And you find this balance between, if there's lots and lots, you can take that, up to 70 people in some blitzes or even more, as long as you've got lots of facilitators and you're going to run some workshops and draw people away from the action, and do that sort of simultaneously as stuff is happening. We tend to break it up so that there are facilitators that will just look after a little zone. There are ones that might just be there to run workshops, and there'll be somebody who's got a big picture, knows what the bottlenecks are and where things have to move, and that's Dylan there, who'd never been to a Permablitz before, in that role. But yeah, you do feel a little bit like you're conducting the movement of wheelbarrows and humans, and keeping an eye on where things are at and how big those piles of wood are, and do we have to just focus on that for a while to move them, or whatever it is. And if there's enough people, we even have someone we call who's a vibes watcher, who's just there to really make sure everyone's having a good time. And as a facilitator, you have to be, it's hard because you want to work, but you can't get too involved. You've got to stay a step backwards, stay a step back just so you can see the overview. And we've also got a guide for facilitators, which goes into all this stuff in a bit more detail.
Who is that guy?
Ben Zander. He's got a really good TED Talk. Actually, one of the best I've seen. Has anyone seen it? Yeah. He talks about shiny eyes. So that's what he wants to see in his audience. So has everyone got shiny eyes? Or, and of course, the facilitators need to get there a bit early too for the last minute planning, and so that's what was happening here. In the very first part of the day, as people are sort of drifting in, we normally say they start at 10 o'clock, but it's very hard to, there are just weird, chaotic things where sometimes everyone's there by 5 past and sometimes they're rolling in at 11 or 12. It's good to have something just really basic to do at the beginning so you don't have to explain much. So that normally happens for the first hour. Then you get people together and have a naming circle. Just say where you're from, have you been to a blitz before, whatever, depending on the size. And this is also your chance to do health and safety. So here's Thomas demonstrating the circle of death, which you have around you when you're wielding things like mattocks. We talk a little bit about back care, that kind of stuff. Sunscreen, all the basics. And then very importantly, we explain the design. And this is a chance to talk about not just what we're going to do, but why we're going to do it and what the rationale is behind the design, and explain a few of the permaculture principles that were used in it. And that's not just for people's education, it's because when you get people that feel like they actually have an understanding of why things are happening, often they'll end up doing things better than you envisioned yourself. And there's a lot of, the thing that I like most about Permablitz is that you get people from all different backgrounds and ages. This guy here, he was like pretty much the team leader of this area and really figuring stuff out, like, you know, oh, there's a tree root, we're gonna, problem solving. And people manage to do that much more successfully. People have never met each other than I would have thought possible in these circumstances. It's amazing, actually. And I have been to ones where everything was so micromanaged that didn't happen so much. You just felt a bit more robotic. And so it's the joy of being part of it is you need a little bit of stress. Oh, things seem like they're going a bit wrong, but we overcame them. You need just the right amount but not too much. And then throughout the day there's workshops, and so sometimes these are absolutely crucial to getting work done. So here Martin is, with an A-frame, is explaining how to mark out a contour, and we're actually going to build some swales here, and so that has to happen before we can proceed. Someone's going to have to mark that out. Then there's other workshops which can be completely unrelated. You know, we've done sourdough bread baking inside, and you know, all sorts of things, through down to as simple as like how to catch a chicken. Now the host is probably the person in all this who's taking on the most stress and everything. We have a guide for them as well, and part of their responsibility is to provide the materials, but also to provide some food. I mean, in the early days it was more bring a plate affair, but these days we put it on the host for a shared lunch, and you know, whatever else, teas and coffees and morning teas. So they do that. And then after lunch, it's sort of, you know, it's about getting into work and getting things done often. So for a good result. And you try and finish it before people start to drift off, and you know, thank people, even if you haven't finished. And maybe some of them will hang around after you've done that, and even though a lot will go home. But you know, I've been to one where we're working through torrential rain, and people were out there doing it, and I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but they were so keen to stay after the time and come back later just to see it finished. Yeah. All right, so that's a little bit of an overview of what happens on the day and some of the tips to facilitating. Any questions on that stuff? We can do more at the end. And I'll just say something now about the little collective which is in Melbourne, and how we run things here. And maybe at the end, folks that have been involved in the Sydney stuff can have a little chat about how things have worked up here and what's existing. So there is a little collective which does not organise Permablitzes. It's only there to create the resources, to help people run them and to connect people together that need to be connected. That's pretty much all we do, and promote the concept a little bit. So keep a website going and put newsletters out. Really anybody can take the concept of Permablitz, and as long as it conforms to that definition that we had earlier, we'll promote it. And we're for a little volunteer organisation that doesn't have a bank account, never handles money, we've got pretty organised, but it's something that's happened over, well, you know, the 5 years since we've been going, so it didn't happen overnight. But in the last year, you know, we've got flow charts, we've got really clear roles. This is actually, well, you can't read it, it doesn't matter. There's roles within the collective. So I'm technically the web geek and the documentation guy that makes sure that the blitzes get documented. We've got someone that does internal related stuff and communicates with the designers. We've got someone that does the newsletters. They're the external kind of and media stuff. And we've got someone that just keeps in touch with facilitators. And yeah, those kind of things. So and we've got documents for that. So if somebody dies, it's pretty turnkey, wouldn't destroy us. Heaven forbid. We just get someone else in there. No worries. Yeah.
Talking of that, what do you do about insurance?
Very good question. Well, we're a completely informal organisation. We see our role as more or less providing a notice board and providing resources for people. We're not a legal entity, so we can't get insurance. We've looked into options, and it's the main argument for incorporating. But we've had 120 Permablitzes without incident, and it can come under the homeowner's insurance. It's the same as having a party, really. Yeah. But that's how it works at the moment. Where we've done things more formally through councils and that kind of stuff, which we don't necessarily call them Permablitzes, but we'll call them a permaculture blitz if there's funding going into it, kind of thing. Just as a slight distinction, then the council takes care of all that. Yeah. So that's the website anyway. And we've got all those resources up there. One of the things that helps bind the collective together is just we've spent a bit of time just making clear aims and strategies and what we do and what we don't do. And in the big picture, it's to make the suburbs edible enough such that should Ford become unaffordable, we don't even notice. Well, I mean, that's actually a non-achievable goal, but you know, we'll put it there anyway. You can't grow all your food in the city, but it can help. It can help a lot, and it can make fresh organic food available to people that could otherwise not afford it. But more specifically, we say we're just, all we do is do what we do, only better. That's promote Permablitzes and help other people run them better. Because there's always exciting ideas that come along and we just say no to all of them. And that just keeps everything manageable, and I think it's probably the secret of the success of the collective. We have what we call the most well-respected Grand United Permablitz Designers Guild, which is more or less just a mailing list for people with a PDC who've expressed an interest in designing for Permablitzes, and we do occasional meetups as well, and that often educational or report backs from some big project. So there's about 3,000 people on the main newsletter. There's 165 designers. We've got lists for people with first aid training and facilitators and reporters. We haven't really done anything with this yet. That's still quite informal. But well, the one bit of funding we have got, which was quite recently, we just got a few people to get first aid training. And promised to go to a few Permablitzes. So there's no admin involved, it's just the average of first aiders has just gone up. Yeah, and then we've got one just for facilitators, people that have cameras and will report, and the collective, and one just for international and interstate groups. And we've got a whole lot of surveys which we send to the hosts and the designers and the facilitators to find out what was their experience like, and what could be improved. Some information we've had from past hosts, after 3 years or so, we sent out surveys to everybody we could contact. We found that 85% now believe they live more sustainably. 71% are more involved in community activities. 97% have learnt more about permaculture and organic gardening. And the amount of fresh food in their yard, by their own estimations, has gone up from 5% to 38% of what they eat. That's probably an overestimate, but you know, it gives you an idea of scale. We say we will, it's our relationship to funding, we say we'll consider it, because the danger is, as soon as there's money involved, there's politics, you also become dependent on it. We're getting by pretty well without it. It doesn't feel like we're in a burnout, or we're likely to anytime soon. It's quite fun, you know, as it happens. So we say we will consider accepting it when it contributes to decentralisation and the autonomy of Permablitz groups. So that's our criteria. And I'll just mention, so some of the regional groups, there's Alice Springs, but I think that this is Portugal, Hawaii. There's groups popping up all around the place. Istanbul, in most of the capital cities. And who's been to a Permablitz in Sydney, by the way? I should have asked that right at the start. Yeah. And yeah, so there's been quite a few here as well. One thing that we're finding is that, who's familiar with the transition towns concept? So, does anybody want to give a 30-second definition? Let's, yeah?
It's basically a community-based grassroots response to climate change and to peak oil, and building resilient local communities and developing our resources locally.
Yeah. And it's kind of like this bottom-up grassroots whole region planning kind of framework. Completely overwhelming. Yeah. Very exciting. You know, it's if anything's going to, you know, make our lives dignified and decent and abundant into the future, it's these kind of things. But it's also almost so overwhelming that some groups get a little bit, you know, it's hard to know where to begin, right? I don't know. But, well, some that I've heard about today, there's based around community gardens and things. But yeah, Permablitz sort of encapsulates a lot of the same principles and goals, but in a much smaller and less ambitious and kind of way. But a lot of transition groups have been using it as a way of, well, learning to see if they like each other and can work with each other with some short-term achievable goals. and so, yeah, more and more transition groups are sort of forming their own Permablitz, well, you know, organising their own. Yeah. Another nice little thing that's come out of it in Melbourne is that there's what they call Playblitz. Yeah, people have bred. Yeah, so there's a couple of groups in the western suburbs that have organised permaculture playgroups, which they call Playblitz, and have sort of networked through the Permablitz network, and they have, you know, they do gardening work with the kids. So it's kind of like a babysitter's club, if you like, or a distributed child minding network. And out of Permablitz, myself and Dan started Very Edible Gardens, and that was really just because we had so much experience. Well, you know, humble, but we'd done a lot of properties through the Permablitz network and felt like we could professionalise it. And that's, yeah, really taken over our lives. But we're both still involved in the Permablitz network and doing volunteer stuff as well. We have done a little bit of working with councils. Yeah, but I thought that was the way forward, but we're doing pretty well without them actually. So yeah, I guess that's really pretty much all I wanted to say.
What does your business do?
So it's a permaculture design with an urban focus. So the question was, what does the business do? We do permaculture design, implementation, so more and more landscaping. We just help people out with, if they want something simple like some raised veggie beds or a chook system. And we run courses and we do festivals and do work with councils. Yeah.
You design like private, customized?
Yeah, most of our clients are homeowners. So it sort of hits a different market than Permablitz, which is people that are probably more self-motivated. And although a lot of our clients are too, actually, but they just need that design so that they know that when they are putting all that energy into their system, there's part of a bigger picture. And it's all, you're not putting something in the wrong spot with all your energy. Yeah. So the question was how much time goes into the planning. Most of the designers do it as volunteers. They're often recent graduates of permaculture design courses, but they put in a fair bit of time. Like it's not...
Because they've got to visit them.
Oh yeah, they've got to visit them. Often they go more than once. But you know, what they get out of it is, well, some real world design experience with a bit of mentoring if they need it. And they get to also, you know, make mistakes in somebody else's yard, which is...
When you ask people,
Yep.
like where does their wind come from, or you know about water, or in, you know, some places frost. Some people don't have a clue.
Oh yeah, well you do get to know your own area, so you've got, yeah, a pretty good idea of that stuff. Yeah, I mean, you get an eye for it, so you don't really need to ask in the suburbs as much as you would on a country block. So the question was, people aren't aware of where the wind comes from or where the frost is, so how do you know when you just turn up and do it quickly? That is more of an issue, yeah, out in the country than in the suburbs. Yeah. But the host puts the most effort in, really, in most cases, and they should. And they take on the most amount of stress.
All right, so
yeah.
You know, X wants their Permablitz. Do you sort of, are they slotted in 4 weeks, 3 months?
It's quite organic. So when somebody wants a Permablitz and they've been to 3 or so, what we'll do is we'll forward their brief and we'll say, make it sound, you know, fun and sexy, especially the further out they are and harder to get to, and exciting to be a part of. And we'll forward that to the designers, and they can choose to get a professional one at that point as well, but usually we'll forward it to the volunteer designers, and we'll try and get 2 or 3 people that can meet at the same time at their place. And ideally, at least one of them has a bit of experience. And if they, well, nearly always, but if they don't, then, you know, we're there to give them feedback and mentor. And it's then sort of out of our hands. You guys get the design done, figure it out with the host when there's a date that suits you both. It'll always be at least a couple of weeks ahead, but you know, sometimes the process can drag on for months. Yeah.
From a group perspective, do you have resources, as in like shovels and wheelbarrows and all that you allocate to a Permablitz? No.
Yeah, so we just ask people to bring along their own tools, and that's something that because they RSVP, you can ask specifically for what people should bring along. Yeah, Dan was on, like Red Simons does a morning show in Melbourne, And he said, so you must, you know, having all these people in your backyard, don't you worried about theft? But, but the reality is you actually end up with a few extra bits and pieces. Yeah.
The crew, the central, what did you call the central crew?
The collective. Yep.
The collective. Do you actually help, or did you actually end up assigning a set group of designers and a set group of facilitators for every blitz? So is there somebody who's sort of responsible to make it happen?
Yes. So we keep track of who the designers are and who the lead facilitator is. They're often the same person or same group of people, and we check in with them if it seems like it's not happening, just to see where it's at in terms of the process, and just encourage people. And they're the people we check in with after the blitz as well to send surveys to and get feedback.
So how do you actually do that? Is there some kind of...
Google Docs. We just, so we just got a spreadsheet, and is that what you mean? Like, yeah.
How do you make sure that they're actually doing something to move forward towards it?
Well, if we've got a list of ones in progress, and when it started, and so if it's dragged on, you know, we'll just send an email or make some phone calls and just see if.
So they don't start by setting a date when the actual blitz is going to on?
No. They'll let us know when the blitz is going to be on at some point.
So they'll choose a site, and then they'll be going through the design process.
Yeah. Well, no, the site will choose them. So the host will contact us, and we will connect them to the host, and and it'll go from there. Yeah.
Do you find that hosts are just, it's kind of, I guess, a word of mouth that's naturally occurring, that hosts keep on popping up? Like it's just spreading? Yeah,
at one point that was the biggest bottleneck, surprisingly. But we put it out there that, look, don't be shy. We need you. And for the last year, it's been that hasn't been a problem. Yeah, designers are probably the bottleneck now. But surprisingly, we still get volunteers for nearly all of them. Yeah.
How do you organise all the RSVPs?
Well, at the moment, we're just leaving that with the hosts. Yeah, we've looked into systems of doing it as a collective, but it's just it means that they're less sort of. It means we've got more control over the process, and they've got a bit less. We're just happy to keep it that way. Yeah, so there's a newsletter. The question was how we advertise for them. We do have a Facebook page. We don't normally put the blitzes up there even unless it's last minute. We just use the mailing list, and so we put a newsletter out every month or so, and sometimes we have to do emergency late ones because we weren't informed about an upcoming blitz, but that's how we do it, and that gets people along. And even with a week's notice, we can normally fill them. Grand. All right, we better leave it there, hey?
All right. So one more plug. Anybody who is interested in doing a design course who hasn't done one yet, which is most of the reps seem to have done one. There's one coming up starting here on the 17th of March with the amazing Alexia Martinez as lead teacher. Sorry? Part-time, yeah. So it's 1 day a week for 12 weeks. Yeah, 1 day a week. 12 weeks. Yep. So I just want to say thanks heaps to Adam for coming on.
Thanks.